Today's game comes from two heavyweight opponents, two top 10 players in the world, Hikaru Nakamura and Wesley So. This is at the Tata Steel India Rapid tournament, and the time control is 25 minutes with a 10-second increment. And that's actually quite a bit of time for a rapid. With players at this level, 25 minutes with 10-second increment pretty much guarantees you're going to get a pretty solid game of chess. In this game, Nakamura has white, Wesley So has black. Let's jump right in. Nakamura begins with d4, and very quickly we get a Queen's Gambit declined, and he chooses the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit declined, and bishop g5. Now in this position, Wesley So goes ahead and plays bishop to b4. Bishop to e7 is a little more common, but bishop to b4 changes it into something of a Rogozin type system. In fact, in the game we saw yesterday, Wesley So had the white side of this position, and he delivered a mate in 11, so it can get dangerous for black. Knight f3, h6, bishop h4, and in the other game I just mentioned, Anish Giri played g5 and entered this much sharper position. But here, Wesley So goes ahead and castles, keeps it a little more peaceful this time. e3 and bishop to f5. This is a very important achievement for black in this Carlsbad pawn structure. Getting that bishop out and developed and controlling this diagonal is important. The only downside is it leaves b7 a little sensitive, a little under-defended. That's why the main move here is actually queen to b3 to put some pressure on that square. But that is not the move Nakamura played. He played just bishop to e2. So I'm just going to get my pieces out and we're just going to play. Not too sharp. Knight b to d7, but now he plays knight to d2, and that has a threat with it. He's threatening to take on d5, because the knight at d2 actually blocks the pin from this bishop on b4. So d5 is hanging at the moment. The knight on f6, of course, is pinned by the bishop at h4. So c6 defends that. Bishop to g3, a nice diagonal for the bishop. Queen to e7, all of black's pieces are developed, except for the rooks. Queen to b3, as we mentioned, aiming at b7. Knight to b6, castles, rook f e8, a3, kicks the bishop back. The bishops come off the board. So now, again, in this pawn structure, this Carlsbad pawn structure, black's pawns point towards the king side, white's towards the queen side, and generally that's where the play takes place. And in this position, that is what's going to happen. White has no play on the king side, but on the queen side, it's quite significant, and black's play is going to be more on the king side, at least initially. So a4 is played, aiming to kick that knight away and pick up that b7 pawn. Black cannot respond with a5 because the knight would just hang. So instead, he plays rook a to b8 to defend the b7 pawn. The pawn advances, gaining more space. Knight retreats, and now queen to a3. If black's hopes are on the king side, he's going to need to keep the queens on the board. He does not want to exchange the queens here, so he moves the queen. Rook f to e1, and now Wesley So plays knight to e4. He is trading a piece, but he's also clearing the way perhaps for this pawn to advance and getting some control over e4. Knight c4, bishop takes e4. And here, Naka does not take the bishop, but instead plays a6, gaining further space on the queen side. And after b6, we now have a new weakness. The weakness is shifted from b7 and is now on c6. White can come in with either rook and immediately apply pressure to the backward c6 pawn. Rook a to c1, doing just that. The bishop moves to f5. So I want to keep that piece. If I want to attack, I'm going to need pieces, so I'll save that bishop. b4. Fixes the c5 square. That makes it much harder for the c-pawn to advance. It keeps it a weakness on c6. Queen goes to g6, aims at the king, and also controls a very important diagonal, hitting b1. The rook goes to c3. Simply Nakamura wants to double on the c-file and attack the c6 weakness. Rook to e6 defends it. The rook can also be used in a rook lift to attack on the king side. Rook e to c1, rook b to e8, bishop to f1, tucking back. And now the next move black makes here, and he could have made this earlier, is very annoying for white in this structure. He plays the move b5. And the idea is to play knight b6, knight to c4. And when that knight gets on c4, it is very hard for white to generate any play at all on the queen side. And the knight is really well placed, so black can be very happy about his position here. Queen to a5, hoping to at least cause some problems on the queen side. Knight to b6, aiming for c4. Knight f3, knight to c4. A very strong knight, protected and strong on c4. Queen to c7, hits the queen. Obviously, he's threatening to take on a7. Queen to g3. Now he offers the trade of queens, and Wesley So is more than happy to do that. And he has a real edge. I mean, look at these two rooks on c1 and c3. They kind of look silly. They were attacking down the c file, but now that file is completely blocked. They have no purpose where they're at. Rook to b8, very simple. Rook b6, rook takes a6. Simple chess. Find the target, attack the target. Rook a1, rook to b6, knight to e1, bishop to c8. Again, attacking a6. Rook comes to c2, and now he takes the pawn. So Wesley So now has a little bit of fruit for his labor. He has that a6 pawn, and he's up a pawn. Rook a6, bishop takes a6. Knight to d3, can pop into c5 or to e5. The bishop moves to c8. The rook moves to a2, putting some pressure on this pawn, which is currently defended. King to f8, knight to c5. Now, white could take black's knight on c4, and that would leave him with a much better minor piece. It would give black a protected passed pawn on c4, though, but Wesley So says, I don't want to mess with that. I'm going to move that knight. I don't want you to get a superior minor piece. The bishop goes to d3, king to e8, king f1, king d8, the king centralized, and now a6. The pawn looks like it might be able to be captured here, but that doesn't work. If he takes, then rook to a7 just pins the knight, and black would completely be winning there. f3, helping control the e4 square, and also he could expand perhaps later in the center. f5, keeping that pawn, that square fixed. King to d2, rook to a7. Black would love to liquidate this pawn. It wouldn't be a backwards pawn anymore, and he'd have a completely passed pawn at b5 if he could successfully do that. King c3, king c7, king b6. Now black is defending the pawn twice, or three times, really, but he doesn't have to worry about it anymore. Knight to b3, rook to e7, attacking the e3 pawn, rook e1. Now knight to b7, supporting that a5 push, and it really cannot be stopped anymore. Bishop to c2, and now a5 coming through. Now here he could take again, but if he does, this b5 pawn is going to be completely passed. So he plays bishop to d3, but now a4. So this is a protected passed pawn on a4, a very strong piece. What white is going to try to do is create basically a fortress that black cannot break through, and hope that he's not able to do anything with this a pawn. Knight to c5, knight takes c5, dc5, king c7. And this d4 square is very nice for the white king. It'll be well placed on that square, and he goes there immediately. King to d8, bishop to b1, king d8, rook h1, king f7. And black is going to have to find another way through. This pawn on its own is not enough. It's a big distraction for white, but it's not mobile or threatening to queen yet. So he's got to find another place to break through in the position to take advantage. Rook to h5, king g6, rook h1, king g5. And there is quite a bit of maneuvering here. They move the pieces around. Black is looking for a way to break through. And now, after bishop f7, black has his powerful passer. It looks like g5 is going to be the only way to create a pawn break that he might be able to get through on. Bishop to e2, rook h8, and now finally g5, hoping that he can, again, generate a breakthrough on the king side. If the pawn is taken after king g5, the rook can come back to e8, the king can go to g4, and the g3 pawn is in some trouble. So bishop to c2 was played instead, just trying to hold steady. Rook to g8 wants to go down the g file, which is soon to be open. Rook h2, and now a3, finally advancing the pawn. But the pawn is no longer protected. He wants to use this pawn to distract white and then munch the pawns here on the king side. Bishop to b3 stops the pawn from advancing. Rook to e8, threatening rook to e4 check, forcing the king away, and he would either lose b4 or e3. He could not protect both. Bishop c2 keeps the rook from entering, but now, boom, a2. Now the pawn is only one square away from queening, and Hikaru is really going to have to work to keep that from happening. Rook to h1, rook to a8, rook to a1, blockading with the rook on the 8th rank, and now rook to a3. You see white's king is completely stuck. It has nowhere to go. All the squares around it are controlled, so it's very limited. Bishop to d1, aiming at this square. I mean, it's defended at the moment. Bishop g6, bishop e2, pawn takes on f4, gf4, h4, bishop f3, bishop to f7, bishop to d1, bishop to e8. We have some maneuvering. It's almost as if Wesley's trying to figure out how to break through, and they maneuver with the bishops a little bit, attacking the b4 square, And now he comes up with the key idea, h3. And he's sacrificing a pawn, but what he's doing is taking away the defense of the f3 bishop and setting up tactics. So pawn takes pawn, and now, boom, d4 check. And there's no good answer to this move. If he takes with the king, then rook to b4 check, and you just created another passed pawn. And white is in huge trouble. If he takes with the pawn, then rook to a3 check. That's the reason he moved this b pawn away, or excuse me, the g pawn away. Now, when the king moves, he would win the bishop. So, in response to d4, Nakamura plays the king to c2. He doesn't want to open up that c file and lose his bishop. Pawn takes pawn, and now Wesley So has won another pawn. King to c3. Now rook to a3 check. King to d4. Rook to b3. Threatening rook to b1. And that would be it, because that rook would have no choice but to exchange itself off and allow black to queen. So he grabs the pawn now while the rook is blocking black's own bishop. But then rook takes b4 check, also revealing an attack on this rook. And in this position, Nakamura resigned. The reason is after king to c3, counterattacking the rook, you can just play rook takes f4. And now you have a double attack. The bishop and the rook are under attack, and Nakamura cannot save both. A terrific performance by Wesley So against an elite opponent. And even after going over this great game, there's still some great chess out there that you have yet to see. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the key game you're going to want to watch is this one right here. So stay tuned for that.